Mira Ashwood had learned to make herself invisible. At 23, she'd perfected the art of moving through the Crimson Veil Pack's territory without drawing attention, her eyes downcast, her scent muted through years of deliberate suppression. Being a poor Omega in a pack that valued wealth and bloodlines above all else meant survival depended on staying beneath notice. The bucket of dirty water hit the floor at her feet with a splash that soaked her already worn dress. Mira didn't flinch. She'd learned not to. The beta's mate, Clara, stood above her with a cruel smile twisting her perfectly painted lips. "You missed a spot, Omega. Clean it again. All of it." The other pack members in the corridor laughed as they passed, not one stopping to help. Why would they? Mira was nobody. A poor orphan Omega who existed on the pack's charity, if you could call it that. She was invisible unless someone needed someone to humiliate. If you're enjoying this story of transformation and power, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe because we've got so many more incredible stories coming your way. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next to Mira. Mira knelt and began scrubbing the floors again, her hands raw and aching. This was her first job of the day. At dawn, she cleaned the pack house from top to bottom. By mid-morning, she'd moved to the healer's cottage to sort herbs and prepare medicines. By evening, she'd be serving tables at the tavern until well past midnight. 3 jobs, and still she barely had enough to eat. Her shack on the outskirts of Packlands was 4 walls and a roof that leaked when it rained. Everything else, her parents' home, her father's possessions, even the herbs her mother had cultivated, the pack had taken it all after her father died defending the northern border 11 years ago. Marcus Ashwood had been a low-ranking warrior, nothing special in the pack's hierarchy. When rogues attacked and he died protecting the territory, the pack had thanked him with a funeral and then stripped his orphaned daughter of everything. "Omegas don't inherit property," the Alpha had said. "Your father's belongings will be redistributed to wolves who can actually use them." Mira had been 12 years old, still grieving her mother who'd died bringing her into the world, and suddenly she had nothing. No parents, no home, no future. The pack allowed her to stay out of obligation, nothing more. They gave her the shack and the opportunity to work herself to exhaustion. In return, she provided what all Omegas provided, a calming presence that helped stabilize aggressive wolves during territorial disputes. She was useful. That was the only reason they kept her. By midnight, Mira's entire body ached. The tavern had been packed with warriors celebrating something she hadn't cared enough to ask about. They'd been loud, grabbing at her as she served drinks, making crude jokes that she'd forced herself to ignore. One had grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise. "Poor little Omega," he'd leered, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Maybe you're good for something after all." She'd yanked free and continued working because what choice did she have? Report him? To who? The pack didn't care what happened to wolves like her. As she'd cleared tables, she'd overheard conversations that made her hands still. "Did you hear? The council executed Alpha King K.L. Thorne for treason." About time. That Omega-loving weakling was destroying everything our ancestors built. Good riddance. Maybe now we'll get a real king, one who's not afraid to take what we deserve. The words had settled like stones in Mira's stomach. She didn't know much about politics or council decisions, but she knew what it meant when powerful wolves called someone an Omega lover like it was a curse. It meant he'd tried to help wolves like her, and now he was dead for it. Even kings could fall, she'd thought. Even the powerful could be destroyed by those more powerful still. The walk home was long and dark. The dirt road that led to her shack wound through the forest, far from the main pack dwellings. Mira didn't mind the isolation usually. It meant fewer wolves to avoid, fewer opportunities for humiliation. But tonight, exhaustion made every step feel like moving through mud. Her mind was already calculating tomorrow's schedule. 3 hours of sleep if she was lucky. Then up before dawn to start all over again. That's when she heard it. A sound cutting through the quiet night, labored breathing, the kind that came with serious pain. It was coming from the ravine beside the eastern road, the deep gully that marked the edge of pack territory. Mira stopped, her heart suddenly pounding. Getting involved in pack business, especially anything that happened near the borders, invited trouble she couldn't afford. She should keep walking. Should get home, get what little sleep she could, and pretend she'd heard nothing. But the sound reminded her of her father, of his final breaths as he'd lain dying from rogue claws while 12-year-old Mira had been too small, too weak, too helpless to save him. Her feet carried her down the embankment before her mind could override them. What she found at the bottom wasn't an animal. It was a man, and he was dying. He lay crumpled among the rocks, his body broken in ways that should have been immediately fatal. Blood soaked his shredded clothing, pooling beneath him in the dirt. Deep gashes covered his torso and limbs, the kind of wounds that came from silver weapons specifically designed to kill shifters. His face was half obscured by dark hair matted with blood. But even unconscious and broken, he radiated power. This wasn't some low-ranking wolf. This was an alpha, and a strong one. Mira knelt beside him, her hands shaking. She should run, should alert the pack guards and let them handle this. But then she saw the silver chains wrapped around his wrists, still smoking slightly where they touched his skin. Silver chains weren't used for restraint during normal fights. They were used for torture, for execution. Someone had done this deliberately, had wanted him to suffer before he died. His hand twitched, fingers curling as if he was still fighting even while unconscious. That small movement made her decision. She couldn't leave him. Wouldn't leave him. Not like she'd left her father because she'd been too weak to help. Mira grabbed the chains, gasping when they burned her palms. She used torn fabric from her apron as a barrier and pulled them free. The moment the silver fell away, his breathing improved slightly, becoming less labored. Now came the impossible part, getting him to safety. He was massive, easily twice her weight, pure alpha muscle and bulk. There was no way she could carry him, except she had to. Mira gripped his arms and pulled. Her omega strength should have been laughable against his size, but desperation fueled her. She dragged him inch by agonizing inch up the embankment, through the forest paths she knew by heart, her muscles screaming in protest. Dawn was breaking by the time she got him inside her shack. They both collapsed on the floor, Mira's entire body shaking from exertion. Her hands were blistered and bleeding. Her dress was soaked with his blood and her sweat. But he was here. Safe. She'd done it. Now came the harder part, keeping him alive. Mira used every skill the pack healer had taught her over the years. She cleaned his wounds with precious herbs, the ones she'd bought with the last of her savings. She set bones that should have been beyond her skill level, her hands moving with a steadiness born from years of watching her healer mentor work. The silver poisoning was the worst part. His veins were darkened, black lines spreading from where the chains had burned him. This kind of poisoning killed even strong alphas. She worked for hours, barely aware of time passing, cleaning, treating, bandaging. Her small shack filled with the scent of medicinal herbs and blood. Finally, as full morning arrived, his breathing steadied into something that resembled actual sleep rather than unconscious delirium. Mira sat back against the wall, staring at the stranger who now occupied most of her floor space. She'd missed her shifts, all of them. The pack house cleaning, the healer's cottage, the tavern. She'd lose wages she desperately needed, might even lose the jobs entirely. But looking at this broken alpha, watching his chest rise and fall with steady breath, she knew it was worth it. It had to be worth it. She wrapped herself in her only blanket and closed her eyes, whispering into the quiet, "Don't die. Please don't die. I can't lose someone else." 3 days passed in a blur of fever and fear. The alpha, whoever he was, burned with fever that first full day. He thrashed in delirium, muttering broken words that made no sense. Counsel, betrayal, Voted me out. Can't let them. Mira held him down when convulsions hit, forcing water and herbal tinctures between his lips, praying to God she'd stopped believing in years ago. The pack healer came by on the second day, checking on Mira's supposed illness. Mira had blocked the door, her heart pounding. "Just a stomach bug," she'd said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm fine, really. Just need rest." The healer had looked suspicious, but had left. Mira's hands had shaken for an hour afterward. Too close. That had been too close. On the third day, as she was changing his bandages, his hand shot out and caught her wrist. Not aggressive, but firm. Gentle, but unyielding. Mira gasped and looked up to find amber eyes staring at her. They were alert now, aware, assessing her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then his voice, rough from disuse, broke the silence. "Where am I?" "Safe," Mira whispered. "You're in Crimson Vale territory. I found you in the ravine 3 days ago." His grip on her wrist tightened slightly. "You shouldn't have interfered. They'll come looking. When they find me here, they'll kill you for helping." "Who will kill me?" His expression was grim. "Everyone. Because I'm K.L. Thorne, Alpha King of the Northern Realms." The world tilted. Mira stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. Alpha King. Not just any alpha, but the ruler of all 7 territories. The most powerful shifter in existence. The one the warriors at the tavern had been celebrating. "You're supposed to be dead," she breathed. "They said the council executed you for treason." "I was supposed to be dead," Kale confirmed, his voice hardening. "The council voted for my rejection and execution. I escaped before they could carry out the sentence." His amber eyes held hers. "And now you're harboring the realm's most wanted fugitive. They sent orders to every pack. Anyone found helping me faces execution." Ice flooded Mira's veins. She was hiding the most wanted wolf in existence. If anyone discovered him here, if anyone reported her, she'd die. They'd both die. Kale seemed to read her thoughts. "You need to turn me in. Tell them you found me and were bringing me to the authorities. Claim ignorance. They might spare you." Mira pulled her wrist free from his grip and squared her shoulders. Every instinct screamed at her to do exactly what he said. Save herself. But she looked at this broken king, this alpha everyone wanted dead, and felt something shift in her chest. She'd spent her entire life being powerless, accepting whatever scraps the pack threw her way, watching injustice after injustice and staying silent because speaking up would cost more than she could afford to lose. "No," she said firmly. "You're not dying here." Kael's eyes widened fractionally. "You don't understand what you're risking." "I understand perfectly." Mira's voice strengthened despite her fear. "The council wants you dead because you protected wolves like me. Because you fought for reforms that would have given poor Omega's actual value, instead of just using us as pack stabilizers. I won't let them murder you for that. I won't." Something flickered in Kael's expression. Surprise, maybe. Or something deeper. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Mira. Mira Ashwood." "Well, Mira Ashwood," Kael said, and despite his wounds, despite everything, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "It seems I owe you my life. But you should know, saving me just painted a target on your back that will bring every powerful shifter in existence to your door." Over the next hours, as Kael's strength slowly returned, he explained everything. The council had wanted war with the Western territories. Rich resources there, land ripe for conquest, profits that would make the territorial alphas even wealthier and more powerful. "I refused," Kael said, his voice tight with anger. "Said we'd negotiate trade agreements instead. That invasion would cost thousands of lives, and for what? So they could get richer?" The council had grown hostile. "An alpha king who won't fight is no king at all," they'd said. Then Kale had pushed for reforms, omega protections, wealth redistribution, limits on territorial alpha power, real structural changes that would have helped wolves like Mira. That's when they found it, Kale continued. An ancient law that lets the council vote to reject a king they deem unfit. They staged a trial, called me weak, called me the Omega Lover King like it was a curse instead of a badge of honor. The vote had passed, 12-5. Sentence, public execution for bringing dishonor to the throne. Kale had escaped during transfer to the execution site, but barely. "They're hunting me?" he said. "Every pack, every alpha, the order is dead or alive, but they prefer dead." He looked at Mira. "That's why you need to understand what helping me means. They won't show you mercy." Mira felt anger burning in her chest. "So, they want you dead for protecting wolves like me?" She told him about her own poverty then, about losing everything when her father died, about 11 years of scrubbing floors and being invisible. "We're pack stabilizers," she said, her voice breaking. "Useful tools, nothing more. My father died defending the border. The pack took everything we had the next day. Said Omegas don't inherit." Kale's expression darkened. "That shouldn't be legal. I tried to pass inheritance protections, tried to make it law that Omegas have full rights to family property." "Let me guess," Mira said bitterly. "The council blocked it." He nodded. "They blocked everything. Every reform, every protection, every limit on their power." Silence stretched between them. Then Mira said quietly, "Your council are the traitors, not you." "Not everyone sees it that way," Kale replied. "Then everyone's wrong." Days passed. Kale recovered slowly, his alpha healing working now that the silver was out of his system. Mira continued missing her jobs, running through her meager supplies to keep them both fed. Kale noticed. "You're starving yourself to feed me," he said one evening, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm fine," Mira insisted. "You're not. When did you last eat a full meal?" The silence that followed answered his question. 3 days before I found you," she finally admitted. Kale's jaw clenched. "Mira, you can't—" "It's worth it," she interrupted firmly. Their eyes held. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk everything for a stranger?" Mira struggled to find words. "Because watching powerful wolves crush everyone beneath them and doing nothing, I can't anymore. I can't." Something shifted in the air between them. Kale reached out and cupped her face gently. "You're the bravest Omega I've ever met." Mira's breath caught. The touch sent unexpected warmth through her chest, a sensation she couldn't name. It felt like recognition, like something clicking into place. Kyle felt it too. She saw it in the way his eyes widened slightly, in the way his thumb brushed her cheek with reverent gentleness. But before either could speak, sound shattered the moment. Horses outside, many of them, voices calling, "Search every structure! The King's scent trail leads to this sector." Kale's entire body went rigid. "They found me. Council's hunters." He looked at Mira with desperate intensity. "Hide! When they take me, you stay hidden, understand?" Mira grabbed a kitchen knife from her small table. "I'm not hiding." "Mira, please." The door exploded inward. 6 armored wolves poured through the shattered doorway, silver weapons gleaming in the lamplight. They moved with the precision of trained killers, surrounding Kale and Mira in seconds. The leader's eyes locked on Kale, then slid to Mira. His smile was vicious. "Well, well. The dead king and his little Omega whore. The council will pay extra for both of you." Kale tried to shift. His body shimmered, bones beginning to crack and reform, but he was still too weak. The transformation failed, leaving him gasping. He lunged at the hunters in human form instead, and even weakened, he was formidable. His fist connected with one hunter's jaw with a crack that echoed through the small space. The hunter went down hard. Kale spun and kicked another in the chest, sending him flying backward through the doorway. Mira didn't hesitate. She drove her kitchen knife into the thigh of the hunter closest to her. He howled in pain and rage. The leader backhanded her. The blow sent her flying across the room. She hit the wall hard enough that stars exploded across her vision. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Kael roar, "Don't touch her!" But the distraction cost him. 3 hunters tackled him simultaneously, bearing him to the ground under their combined weight. Silver chains materialized from their packs, wrapping around Kael's wrists, ankles, and throat with brutal efficiency. He screamed as the silver burned into his skin, smoke rising from the contact points. The smell of burning flesh filled the shack. Mira scrambled to her feet. "Stop! You're killing him!" The leader grabbed her hair and yanked her head back, forcing her to look at him. "Should have stayed invisible, little Omega. Now you're an accomplice to treason." Mira spat in his face. He laughed, a sound full of cruel amusement. "Oh, the council will love breaking you." They threw both Kael and Mira into a reinforced cart, essentially a prison on wheels. The bars were coated in silver, making escape impossible for any shifter. Kael was chained to one wall, barely conscious from the silver poisoning already spreading through his system again. Mira was chained to the opposite wall, forced to watch him suffer. The journey toward the capital began. Hours passed in nightmare. Kael drifted in and out of consciousness, his skin growing paler as the silver worked its poison through his veins. Mira kept calling to him. "Kael, stay with me. Please stay with me." His eyes would flutter open occasionally. "Shouldn't have protected me," he'd mumble through cracked lips. "I'd do it again," Mira said fiercely. A hunter walking beside the cart laughed. "How sweet. The Omega's in love with the dead king." "Shut up," Mira snapped. That night, they camped but left the cart locked. Mira, desperate to offer any comfort, stretched her fingers through the bars toward Kael. She could barely reach him, could only just brush his hand with her fingertips. But the moment their skin made contact, something extraordinary happened. Warmth surged between them, a wave of energy so powerful that both gasped. The silver chains on their wrists glowed briefly, then hairline cracks appeared in the metal. The guards, sitting around their fire, didn't notice. Kael stared at her across the cart, his amber eyes wide. "Did you feel that?" "Yes," Mira whispered. "What was it?" His voice was filled with wonder and disbelief. "The mate bond. Mira, you're my mate." Her world tilted. "That's impossible. I'm nobody. I'm just a poor Omega from—" "You're everything," Kael interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "If we were bonded, if I could claim you properly, the connection would give us both strength. The mate bond amplifies power." "But the silver—" Mira started. "I know," he said grimly. "We can't complete it while we're like this. But Mira, this changes everything. If they know we're true mates, they'll use you against me even more viciously." He was right. True mates were rare, precious, and in a situation like theirs, a vulnerability that could be weaponized. By morning, the reality of their situation crashed down. The cart rolled through the capital city's gates as crowds gathered. Word had spread. The rejected king was captured. People lined the streets shouting, "Traitor! Omega lover! Weakling!" They threw rotten food and stones at the cart. Mira flinched as something hit her shoulder. Kael tried to shield her with his body as much as the chains would allow. The cart stopped in front of a massive coliseum, an arena built for spectacle and blood sport. The leader yanked Mira out roughly. "Trial's in 1 hour. Better pray for mercy." "The council doesn't give mercy," Kael said darkly as guards dragged him out as well. They were thrown into separate holding cells beneath the arena. Mira could hear the crowd above, hundreds, maybe thousands of wolves gathering to watch their king die, to watch her die beside him. When they dragged her into the arena an hour later, the sight stole her breath. The The Colosseum was enormous, stone walls rising high into the sky, tiers of seating packed with wolves from across the realm. In a royal box sat 12 figures in formal robes. The council, the wolves who'd orchestrated everything. Guards forced Mira to her knees in the center of the arena beside KL. Both of them were chained, battered, barely able to stay upright. The head counselor, an older wolf named Aldrich, stood. His voice carried easily across the arena. KL Thorne, rejected by this realm, you stand accused of treason, weakness, and corrupting the throne's honor. How do you plead? Kale, despite the chains and obvious pain, lifted his head. I plead that this council is corrupted, not me. The crowd erupted in shouts. Guards slammed spear butts against the ground until silence returned. Aldrich smiled coldly. Still defiant, still arrogant. He pointed at Mira. And this Omega? Who is she? Leave her out of this, KL said. She's innocent. Innocent? Aldrich's laugh was theatrical, playing to the crowd. She harbored a fugitive. That's treason. He turned to address the thousands watching. This is what the Omega Lover King brought us to. Hiding behind a poor female, using her to shield his cowardice. The crowd roared approval. Mira's hands clenched into fists despite the chains. She shouted over the noise. He's not a coward! He's the only one who cared about wolves like me! Aldrich's eyes narrowed dangerously. Silence, Omega. Your betters are speaking. He held up a document, brandishing it for all to see. We investigated this Omega's background. Mira Ashwood, daughter of Marcus Ashwood, a warrior of no significance. He paused for dramatic effect. But her mother... Now that's interesting. Elena Nightshade. Does that name sound familiar? Mira's heart stopped. Her mother's maiden name. She'd never known it. Her father had never spoken of her mother's family. Another counselor stood. The Nightshade line. Ancient healers. Keepers of the old magic. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Most believed the line died out, Aldrich continued. But here we have proof. A Nightshade descendant walking among us. The old magic was deemed too dangerous centuries ago, he said, his voice growing louder. All Nightshades were ordered to suppress their gifts, to let the bloodline fade into obscurity. He looked directly at Mira. Your mother hid what she was, married a common warrior to disappear into anonymity. But you carry her blood, Omega. You carry magic that could challenge the natural order. Aldrich turned back to the crowd. This Omega potentially wields power that our ancestors feared, power that was banned for good reason. The crowd's reaction was mixed now, fear warring with bloodlust. Mira felt panic clawing at her throat. I don't have any magic. I'm just a healer's assistant. Just a poor Omega, Aldrich interrupted, his smile cruel. Perhaps. Or perhaps you're a threat we should eliminate before you awaken into something we can't control. He looked between Mira and Kale. How convenient. We can execute you both and call it justice. Kale strained against his chains. She's done nothing wrong. She saved a dying wolf. That's all. The law is clear, Aldrich pronounced, his voice ringing through the Colosseum. Harboring forbidden magic, whether knowingly or not, is punishable by death. Harboring a fugitive king is treason punishable by death. He raised his hands to silence the crowd. KL Thorne, for your crimes against the realm, we sentence you to death by silver blade. Mira Ashwood, for harboring a fugitive and carrying forbidden magic in your blood, we sentence you to death by silver blade. Executions to commence at sunset. Let all wolves see what happens to those who defy this council. Guards moved to drag them to separate cells. Kale fought against them. No! Take me! Let her go! She's innocent! Mira screamed his name as they pulled her away. Their eyes met across the arena, the mate bond pulling desperately between them, both feeling the terror of losing each other before they'd ever really had a chance. Aldrich watched with obvious satisfaction. "Separate them," he commanded. "I want the king to suffer knowing he caused his mate's death." The cell they threw Mira into was dark, cold, and lined with silver bars that prevented any hope of escape. She collapsed against the stone wall, her body shaking. This was it. They were going to die. Both of them. For trying to do the right thing, for daring to challenge wolves more powerful than themselves. Tears streamed down her face as the reality sank in. But then, warmth bloomed in her chest. The mate bond, reaching for Kale even through stone walls and silver barriers. She could feel him, his anguish, his rage, his desperate need to protect her. And beneath all of that, his absolute faith in her. His voice seemed to whisper through the bond, "You're stronger than you know." Mira looked at her hands, remembered Aldrich's words about her mother, about nightshade magic, about power that had been feared and suppressed for generations. She whispered into the darkness, "I don't know how to use it. I don't even know if it's real." But deep inside her chest, beneath the fear and grief and exhaustion, something stirred. Something that had been sleeping for 23 years. Something that was waking up. Sunset approached too quickly. Guards came for her, their hands rough as they dragged her from the cell and through tunnels beneath the arena. She could hear the crowd above, thousands of wolves chanting for blood, for justice, for spectacle. They emerged into the arena as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. 2 execution blocks had been set up side by side in the center of the arena. Kael was already there, forced to his knees, his body wrapped in so many silver chains he could barely move. His skin was burned and blistered where the metal touched. When their eyes met, she saw everything in his gaze: love, sorrow, rage, and terrible helplessness. The guards threw Mira down beside him, forcing her to her knees on the second block. Aldrich's voice boomed across the arena. "Behold the traitor king and his Omega accomplice! Let their deaths remind all wolves that defiance brings only destruction!" An executioner stepped forward, a massive wolf carrying a silver blade so large it required both hands to wield. He positioned himself behind Kael first, raising the blade high above his neck. Mira's scream tore from her throat. "No!" The word carried force that shouldn't have been possible. The ground beneath them trembled. Light exploded from Mira's body, blinding and silver white, ancient power finally awakening after generations of suppression. The execution platform cracked beneath her knees. The silver chains wrapped around her body didn't just break, they shattered into dust that scattered on the wind. Kael's chains disintegrated the same way, dissolving as if they'd never existed. Mira rose to her feet, and she was glowing. Silver white light poured from her hands. Her eyes had turned completely silver. No iris, no pupil, just pure luminous power. The executioner stumbled backward, his silver blade clattering from nerveless fingers. The entire Colosseum went silent. Thousands of wolves staring in absolute shock. Aldrich's face drained of color. "Guards! Stop her!" But the guards couldn't move. They were frozen in place by the sheer magnitude of power radiating from this poor Omega who was supposed to die quietly. Mira's voice, when she spoke, echoed with ancient authority. "You wanted to kill me for carrying magic I didn't know I had? Let me show you what nightshade magic really is." She raised her hands toward the royal box. The 12 council members tried to run. Barriers of solid light materialized around them, trapping them in place. "Confession time, counselors," Mira said, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive arena. "Tell them why you really wanted Kael dead." Aldrich's face twisted with fury. "You can't compel us! No magic can—" "Truth magic," Mira interrupted, "is the oldest nightshade gift. The first and most sacred power of my bloodline." Her eyes blazed brighter. "You will speak true!" Silver light wrapped around Aldrich like chains made of pure force. His mouth opened against his will, words dragged from him by power he couldn't resist. "We wanted war for profit!" he shouted, his voice filled with horror at his own confession. "The Western territories have resources worth billions. We would have gotten rich from conquest." Another counselor, a female alpha from the Eastern Reach, found her own mouth moving without permission. KL's reforms would have stripped our power, given Omega's inheritance rights, made us accountable to our own packs. A third counselor, "We used the ancient law as an excuse. He wasn't unfit. He was threatening our control. He wanted to redistribute wealth, to give power to the powerless." One by one, all 12 were forced to confess. Every scheming plot, every corrupt decision, every lie they'd told to turn the realm against their king. The crowd listened in growing horror and rage. These were the wolves they'd trusted, the council that was supposed to serve the realm's best interests, and they'd betrayed everything for greed and power. When the last confession fell silent, Mira turned to address the thousands of watching wolves. "You came to watch your king die for treason, but he's not the traitor." She pointed at the council. "They are. They rejected a good king because he wouldn't let them profit from war that would have killed your sons and daughters. They sentenced me to death for having magic, but this magic is a gift. My mother's gift, my grandmother's gift, passed down through generations of nightshade healers." Her voice strengthened, carrying to every wolf present. "No more hiding, no more silence, no more letting the powerful crush the powerless beneath their feet." She looked at Kael, and love shone clear in her expression. "And no more calling good wolves traitors for trying to do what's right." The crowd erupted, not with bloodlust now, but with righteous anger turned toward the council. "Free the king! Free the king!" The chant grew, thousands of voices joining together. "Restore the throne!" Aldrich tried one desperate last time. "She's dangerous. Nightshade magic was forbidden for a reason. She could..." "Could what?" Mira interrupted. "Could do this?" Her light reached out into the crowd, touching wounded wolves who'd been injured in the crush of bodies or accidents. They gasped as injuries healed instantly. Broken bones knitted, scars faded, pain vanished. "You call this dangerous?" Mira demanded. "Healing? Protection? Truth? These are what you feared?" The chant shifted. "Our king, our Luna, our king, our Luna." Kael rose to his feet, every inch the Alpha King despite the burns covering his skin from the silver. His presence commanded the arena. "By the authority still vested in me by pack law, I charge this council with treason and corruption. The vote to reject me was based on lies and manipulation. It is void." He looked out at the thousands of watching wolves. "Do the packs of the northern realms accept my continued rule?" The answer was deafening. Howls split the air, so many voices raised together that the sound shook dust from the ancient stone walls. "Yes! Our king! Our king!" Aldrich snarled, making one final attempt to salvage his power. "This isn't over. We still have supporters. We still have..." Mira's light wrapped around all 12 council members. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is over." The silver glow intensified, and the council members screamed as their alpha power was stripped away. Not killed, but reduced. Transformed from dominant alphas into common wolves, stripped of the authority they'd abused. Guards who'd remained loyal to Kael moved forward to drag them away to the dungeons. The crowd's celebration was explosive, wolves cheering and howling and crying with relief. Kael turned to Mira as the arena erupted around them. The poor Omega who'd saved him. The Nightshade heir who'd awakened ancient magic to protect him. His mate. "You saved me again," he said softly, reaching to cup her face. Mira smiled, exhausted, her light finally fading back into her skin. "We saved each other." Then her knees buckled as the enormous expenditure of power caught up with her. KL caught her before she could fall, lifting her into his arms. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you." 3 days later, Mira woke in a bed so soft she thought she was still dreaming. Silk sheets, a warm fire crackling in a massive fireplace, windows that looked out over a city that stretched to the horizon. This wasn't her shack. This wasn't anywhere she'd ever been. Cale sat in a chair beside the bed, and the relief that flooded his face when her eyes opened was palpable. "You're awake. Thank the ancients you're awake." "How long?" Mira asked, her voice rough. 3 days. Using that much magic, awakening your power so suddenly. It exhausted you completely. Cale took her hand gently. "But you're safe now. We're safe." Mira looked around the opulent room again. "Where am I?" "The royal palace. You're home now, if you'll have it." She sat up slowly, emotions warring in her chest. "Cale, I'm just a poor Omega from—" He stopped her with a gentle finger against her lips. "You're my mate. You're the most powerful nightshade in 3 centuries. You're the wolf who saved my life twice and exposed the council's corruption." His voice softened. "And you're the woman I love, have loved probably since you pulled me from that ravine and refused to let me die." Tears filled Mira's eyes. "You love me?" "Desperately. Completely. With everything I am." Cale leaned closer. "I love your courage, your compassion, your absolute refusal to accept injustice. I love that you risked everything to save a stranger. I love you, Mira." The tears spilled over. "I love you too. I think I have since the moment I touched you and felt something I'd never felt before." She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I love you, Cale." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring years of loneliness and pain and hope into that connection. The mate bond flared between them, visible as golden light that wrapped around their joined forms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cale said, "We should complete the bond, make it permanent and unbreakable." "Yes," Mira breathed. "Yes, please." That evening, the great hall of the palace was prepared for ceremony. Every territorial alpha had been summoned. Hundreds of wolves from across the realm gathered to witness. Mira wore a gown of deep emerald that made her skin glow. Someone had braided silver thread through her hair. She looked like a queen, and she barely recognized herself. Cale stood waiting for her at the center of the hall, dressed in ceremonial armor with his crown restored to his head. When their eyes met across the distance, everything else faded. He was hers. She was his. That was all that mattered. They met in the center, and Cale took her hands before all witnesses. "I, Cale Thorne, Alpha King of the Northern Realms, claim Mira Ashwood Nightshade as my mate before all assembled." His voice rang clear and strong. "She is poor no longer. She is Omega no longer. She is Luna of the Northern Realms, my equal in all things." He looked into her eyes. "Do you accept this claiming?" Mira's voice was steady and sure. "I accept. I, Mira Nightshade, claim Cale Thorne as my mate. I choose you freely, completely, for all our days." The mate bond snapped fully into place, and this time it was visible to everyone. Golden and silver light intertwined around them, so bright that wolves had to look away. Cale pulled her close and bit gently into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. The claiming mark appeared instantly, glowing before settling into a permanent mark that would identify her as his mate forever. Mira bit him in return, her mark appearing on his shoulder. The bond completed, unbreakable, eternal. The crowd exploded in celebration. Music began, tables laden with food materialized, wine flowed freely. but Kael only had eyes for Mira. "My Luna," he murmured against her ear. "My king," she replied with a smile. During the feast, Kael stood to make an announcement. "The council's corruption revealed a broken system. That ends tonight." He looked around at every face watching him. "Effective immediately, all Omegas have full legal rights, including property inheritance." Cheers erupted from Omega sections of the hall. "Wealth-based discrimination is now illegal. Every wolf, regardless of birth status, has value and rights that will be protected by law." "A new council will be formed," Kael continued, "with representatives from all ranks, not just alphas. Every voice will be heard." He turned to Mira. "And to lead these reforms, my Luna will serve as royal advocate for the powerless." Mira stood, surprised. Kael smiled at her. "You know what it's like to be invisible, to be dismissed and devalued. You'll make sure it never happens to anyone again." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I accept. Every Omega, every poor wolf, every dismissed voice, I'll fight for them. I'll fight for all of us." The hall erupted in standing ovation. An elderly Omega in the crowd called out, "You were one of us! You didn't forget where you came from!" Mira's voice carried clearly. "I'll never forget. None of us will ever forget again. That's my promise." Later, alone in their chambers, the celebration still echoing faintly through the palace, Kael wrapped his arms around Mira from behind. "How does it feel, being Luna?" She leaned back against him. "Terrifying. Wonderful. Surreal. Like I'm living someone else's life." "It's your life now," Kael said. "Our life." She turned in his arms. "We're going to change everything, aren't we?" "We already have," he replied. "But yes, there's so much more to do." They kissed deeply, completely, the mate bond humming with contentment between them. Tomorrow would bring challenges, reforms to implement, a kingdom to rebuild, wolves who'd resist change every step of the way. But tonight they had each other, and that was enough. 6 months passed in a blur of change. Mira sat in her office, now officially the Royal Advocate's chambers, reviewing petitions from Omegas across the realm, requests for inheritance rights, for protection from abusive alphas, for education opportunities that had been denied them. She approved each one with her official seal, her signature carrying the weight of law. A knock on her door announced a visitor. An elderly Omega entered, the same one who'd called out at the feast. "Luna Mira, I wanted to thank you personally." Mira stood, gesturing for her to sit. "Please, tell me what's happened." "My daughter inherited her father's land when he passed," the old Omega said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "The pack tried to block it, said Omegas can't own property, but I showed them your law, the new law you created." She grabbed Mira's hands. "She has a future now, a real future, because of you." After the Omega left, Mira stood at her window looking out over the city. 6 months ago, she'd been scrubbing floors, invisible and powerless. Now she was Luna, reformer, voice for thousands who'd never had one before. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach where new life was growing. She'd discovered the pregnancy that morning, hadn't told Kael yet. That evening, she and Kael traveled to Crimson Vale, an official royal visit to her old pack. The wolves lined up formally to greet them, nervous and respectful. The beta's mate, Clara, knelt before them. "Your Majesty, Luna Mira, welcome." Her voice shook with barely concealed fear. Mira looked at the woman who'd tormented her for years, remembered every humiliation, every cruel word. Then she said simply, "Stand. You're forgiven." Clara's head snapped up, shock written across her face. "I'm not here for revenge," Mira continued. "I'm here to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else again." She turned to address the entire pack. Under the new laws, every Omega here has rights. Property, inheritance, voice in pact decisions. Any Alpha who violates these rights answers directly to the throne. To me. She walked through the packlands to her old shack. It still stood, leaning slightly, the roof still leaking. Kale stood beside her. Should we tear it down? Build something better here? Mira shook her head. No, leave it standing. Let it be a reminder of where I came from and how far we've come. That night, back at the palace, she told him about the baby over a private dinner. His reaction was everything she'd hoped for. Pure joy, wonder, immediate protectiveness. We're having a child, he said, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach, an heir to everything we're building. A child who'll grow up in a kingdom where they're valued regardless of rank, Mira added. Where poor Omegas can become queens, Kale said softly. Where rejected kings can find their purpose, Mira replied. They held each other as night fell over the realm, both thinking about the future they were creating. Not just for themselves or their child, but for every wolf who'd ever been dismissed, rejected, or told they didn't matter. Later, Mira stood on their private balcony overlooking the city. Kael joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting protectively over where their child grew. What are you thinking about? He asked. About 6 months ago, Mira said softly. I was walking home from the tavern, exhausted and invisible, just trying to survive another day. I heard a sound in a ravine, she continued, and my whole life changed. She turned in his arms to face him. I saved you. You saved me. And together we're saving everyone else who ever felt powerless. Kale kissed her forehead. The poor Omega and the rejected king. Mira smiled. Not anymore. Now we're just home. As they stood together watching their kingdom settle into peaceful night, their child growing between them and a future full of hope stretching ahead, Mira knew one truth with absolute certainty. She'd been invisible once, poor once, dismissed and devalued, but she would never be powerless again. Neither would any wolf in their realm. That was the promise they'd made to each other and to every wolf who'd ever been told they didn't matter. And that was the legacy they would build together. One reform, one law, one changed life at a time. The poor Omega had saved the rejected king, and together they'd transformed an entire realm, not through violence or conquest, but through courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that every wolf deserved dignity and hope. That was their story. That was their triumph. And it was only the beginning. 10 years later, Mira stood at the window of the Royal Academy, watching students file into the courtyard below. Not all of them were alphas. In fact, more than half were omegas and betas, something that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. The academy, once reserved exclusively for wealthy alpha children, now accepted students based on merit alone. Scholarship funds ensured that wolves like she'd been, poor and dismissed, could receive education that would open doors previously locked to them. A small hand tugged at her dress. Mira looked down to find her daughter Elena, staring up at her with amber eyes so like her father's. At 7 years old, she already showed signs of inheriting both Kael's alpha strength and Mira's nightshade magic. Just last week, she'd accidentally healed a scrape on her younger brother's knee without even realizing what she'd done. Mama, is it true you used to clean floors? Elena asked with the blunt curiosity of children. Mira knelt to her daughter's level. Yes, little one. I scrubbed floors in a pack house every morning before dawn. Elena's nose wrinkled. But you're the Luna. You're important. I wasn't always Luna, Mira said gently. Once, I was just a poor Omega that nobody noticed. Nobody thought I mattered. That's silly, Elena declared with perfect confidence. Everyone matters. You and Papa made a law about it. Mira pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, marveling at how much had changed. How children like Elena grew up in a world where the idea of wolves not mattering seemed absurd to them. That was the victory, wasn't it? Not just changing laws, but changing hearts and minds so thoroughly that the next generation couldn't imagine the cruelty that had once been normal. "Mama!" Her son, Marcus, came running into the room at full speed. At 5 years old, he had Mira's chestnut hair and her fierce sense of justice. "Papa says we're going somewhere special today. Where are we going?" Kael appeared in the doorway, smiling at the chaos his announcement had created. "I said it was a surprise, Marcus." The boy bounced on his toes. "But I want to know now!" "Patience," Kael said, though his eyes danced with amusement. He looked at Mira over their children's heads. "Are you ready?" She nodded, understanding passing between them without words. 10 years of being mated meant they could communicate entire conversations with just a glance. "Children," Mira said, "we're going to visit the place where your father and I first met." The journey to Crimson Vale took most of the day. Even with the new roads Kael had ordered built throughout the realm, the children chattered excitedly in the carriage, asking endless questions. "Did you really carry Papa 6 miles through a blizzard?" Elena asked. "She did," Kael confirmed. "I was dying, and your mother refused to let me go. She's the strongest wolf I've ever known." "Were you scared?" Marcus wanted to know. Mira considered the question. Terrified. But sometimes being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. The landscape grew familiar as they approached the territory of her old pack. Crimson Vale had changed too. The rigid hierarchy that once defined it had loosened under the new laws. The pack house, where Mira had once scrubbed floors, now employed wolves from all ranks at fair wages with days off and protections against abuse. But they didn't stop at the pack house. Kael directed the carriage toward the outskirts, toward the forest and the ravine where everything had begun. They left the carriage on the road and walked, Kael carrying Marcus when his little legs grew tired, Elena holding Mira's hand. The ravine looked the same as it had 10 years ago. The same rocks, the same trees, the same steep embankment. Mira stood at the edge, looking down to where she'd found Kael broken and dying. "This is where it happened," she said softly. "Papa was hurt and chained with silver. He should have died here." "But you saved him," Elena said. "Yes. I don't know why I climbed down. I just knew I couldn't walk away." Kael stood beside her, his hand finding hers. "She carried me to her shack, which was 6 miles through a blizzard. I still don't know how she did it." "The mate bond gave me strength," Mira said, even though we didn't know that's what it was yet. They showed the children the path Mira had taken, though they didn't walk all 6 miles. Then they visited the shack itself. The pack had wanted to tear it down years ago, but Kael had declared it a historical site, protected by royal decree. It stood as it always had, small and weathered, a testament to survival and courage. Elena walked around it solemnly. "It's so tiny, Mama." "It was all I had," Mira told her. "And I thought I'd die here, alone and forgotten. I never imagined any of this." She gestured to encompass everything, her family, her position, the changes they'd wrought. Never imagined that one choice would change the entire realm. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they made one final stop. The memorial Mira had commissioned 5 years ago stood in a clearing near the ravine. It was a simple stone marker, but the names carved into it were anything but simple. Marcus Ashwood and Elena Nightshade, beloved parents. Mira placed fresh flowers at its base as she did whenever she visited. "Your grandfathers," she told her children. "Marcus died protecting his pack. Elena died bringing me into the world. They never got to see what we built, but everything we've done honors their memory." "I'm named after Grandfather Marcus," the boy said proudly. "And I'm named after Grandmother Elena," his sister added. "You are," Kael confirmed. "And you both carry their legacy of courage and sacrifice." As darkness fell, they prepared to head back to the capital. But first, Mira wanted one more moment. She stood at the ravine's edge, Kael beside her, their children playing nearby under the watchful eye of their guards. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd kept walking that night?" she asked. "If I'd been too scared to climb down?" "You wouldn't have," Kael said with certainty. "It's not in your nature to walk away from someone in need. That's why I fell in love with you. That's why you're the perfect Luna." "We've done good work," Mira said, surveying the forest that had once been her prison and was now just peaceful woods. "The academy, the reforms, the new council structure. Omegas have rights now. Poor wolves have opportunities." "We've done more than good work," Kael corrected. "We've transformed everything. The council reports that Omega enrollments in advanced education are up 300%. Property inheritance disputes have dropped to almost nothing because the law is so clear now. And the petition rate to your office has actually decreased because local packs are handling issues fairly without needing royal intervention." Mira smiled. "So, we're working ourselves out of a job?" "We're proving that just systems don't need constant oversight," Kael said. "They work because wolves believe in them." He pulled her close. "I'm proud of us, of what we've built together." "Papa! Mama! Look!" Elena's voice rang out. She stood with her hands outstretched and silver light glowed faintly around her palms. Not the blazing power Mira had manifested during the trial, but a gentle luminescence. "I can feel it," the little girl said with wonder. "The magic. It's like singing inside me." Mira knelt beside her daughter. "That's your nightshade heritage, your gift. Will you teach me?" Elena asked. "Everything," Mira promised. "I'll teach you healing and truth magic and protection spells. Everything my mother's line preserved for generations." Marcus tugged on Kael's sleeve. "What about me? I don't glow." Kael lifted his son onto his shoulders. "You have different gifts, Marcus. Strength and leadership. The ability to see what's right even when it's hard. Those matter just as much." "Your father's right," Mira added. "Magic is wonderful, but it's not what makes someone valuable. You're valuable because you're you." As they walked back to the carriage, Elena skipping ahead while Marcus rode on Kael's shoulders, Mira felt a profound sense of peace. The scared, invisible girl who'd scrubbed floors and rationed food and believed she'd die alone was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd found her power, her voice, and her purpose. A woman who'd saved a king and transformed a kingdom. But more than that, she'd found home. Not in a palace or a position, but in the family she'd built and the mate who'd chosen her. In children who would grow up never knowing the cruelty she'd endured. In a realm where poor Omegas could dream of futures beyond mere survival. That night, back at the palace with the children asleep and the stars bright outside their windows, Kael held Mira close. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For climbing down into that ravine. For refusing to let me die. For being brave when you had every reason to protect yourself instead." Mira tilted her head up to kiss him. "Thank you for being worth saving. For building this life with me. For loving me when I was nobody." "You were never nobody," Kael said fiercely. "You were always everything. I just had to find you." And there, in the quiet of their chambers with the realm peaceful around them, and their children sleeping safely down the hall, Mira finally let herself believe it. She'd been invisible once, broken, dismissed, and poor. But those experiences had forged her into exactly who she needed to be. Into someone who could change the world because she'd lived in its darkest corners and refused to accept that darkness as inevitable, though the poor Omega had saved the rejected king. Together they'd transformed an entire realm. But more importantly, they'd proven that power didn't come from bloodlines or wealth or status. It came from courage, from compassion, from refusing to accept injustice. And that power, once awakened, could never be suppressed again. That was their legacy. That was their truth. and it would echo through generations long after they were gone, a reminder that anyone, no matter how invisible or powerless they seemed, could change everything. All it took was the courage to climb down into that ravine and save a life. Everything else followed from that single choice, that single moment of defiant, impossible, beautiful bravery.